What is going on, guys? Welcome into the debut episode of the Bubba Rose Show. I'm Bubba Rosenbaum, and we really appreciate you tuning in to our first ever episode as we set sail on this new weekly venture. And this show is something I've thought about for quite some time now, and so it's very exciting that it is finally coming to fruition. We will definitely talk sports with a variety of guests from the sports world, be it coaches, players, administrators, fans, sports writers, announcers, etc. However, sports is definitely not all we will be talking. We'll also talk music, movies, books, travel, and I'm sure a whole lot more. You never know who we might have on the show. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe wherever you listen so that you'll receive a notification whenever our new content is released. Our podcasts will typically be released every Thursday, but I'm sure there will inevitably be those times where life happens and it will result in occasional weeks that feature more than one podcast. And next, the Sports Objective. The Sports Objective is a podcast I've been a part of for going on 3 years now. And that show that focuses on East Carolina athletics, but also has a variety of other sports content. It's going nowhere. The Sports Objective will enter its 4th year on March the 1st, and I will continue to be a part of the Sports OBJ. What do we have headed your way on today's program? Well, folks, one of my favorite all-time sports movies, and really movies in general, is the 1986 classic Hoosiers, starring Gene Hackman as Indiana high school basketball coach Norman Dale. Here in a few minutes, you're going to hear a conversation I had a few days ago with Brad Long. Who's Brad Long, you ask? Well, he played the role of Buddy, who was the team captain of the fictional Hickory High Huskers in Hoosiers. Brad and I will discuss the movie from a variety of angles, and I know you're going to really enjoy getting a behind-the-scenes glance at the making of Hoosiers. However, before we go to that conversation with Brad Long, there are a few items from the sports world over the last week or so that I wanted to touch on briefly. First, anyone who knows me knows that I'm a diehard East Carolina Pirate fan, and so I wanted to say congratulations to my Pirates on the men's basketball team winning 82-73 over number 5 Houston on Wednesday night in Greenville. The Pirates had really battled COVID, and they went 0-5 in the month of January. However, as a 17-point underdog against number 5 Houston, they were able to get it done, get a huge win. And not only was it a tremendous win for the team, but head coach Joe Dooley earned his 200th career win with that 9-point victory over the 5th-ranked Houston Cougars. What a way for Dools to get that landmark victory. Staying in the college basketball world, you had John Chaney back on January 29th, passing away shortly after he had just celebrated his 89th birthday about a week or so earlier. You take a look at John Chaney's career. People, of course, think about everything that he did at Temple, and rightfully so. 24 years with the Owls, 23 postseason appearances, 17 of those being the NCAA tournament with 6 NITs in addition to that. The Owls advanced to the Elite 8 on 5 occasions. And while you do certainly think of those 24 years at Temple, prior to his time there in Philadelphia, right outside of Philadelphia, about 30 miles, is Chaney University, which is a Division II program. And during his years at Chaney, he led Chaney U to 8 NCAA tournaments in 10 years, and also a national title at the Division II level. So 516 wins for John Chaney at Temple, 741 overall, which still ranks top 40 all time. And he was the first black coach to reach the 700 victory milestone. He's someone that he's certainly known for his fire. He referred to himself as crazy at times. And when I think of John Chaney, in addition to all those quality clubs that he had over the years at Temple throughout the 80s and 90s and into the early 2000s, I think of that confrontation that John Chaney had with John Calipari in 1994 when his Owls fell by 1 point to UMass at the Mullen Center. And then he was not pleased with how John Calipari had handled the situation with what Coach Calipari deemed poor officiating. Coach Chaney felt like Coach Calipari had unrightfully and kind of tastelessly singled those guys out. And he called him out for it at his post-game press conference, which led to a scuffle where the media members had to separate Coach Cal as well as Coach Chaney. But if you're not familiar with that, definitely go back on YouTube and check it out. But while that was quite comical, since it did happen, it was something where I think they were able to bury the hatchet, so to speak, years later, and move past that moment that had transpired in 1994. This weekend, you of course had Super Bowl 55 taking place down in Tampa. Tom Brady playing in his 11th Super Bowl, trying to win a 7th Super Bowl title, and obviously his first with the Tampa Bay Bucks. And Tampa Bay is now the first NFL team to ever host a Super Bowl in its home stadium. You have so many storylines in this matchup. In addition to that, you have Kansas City trying to become the first organization to repeat since 2002 and 2003 when New England did so. They would be the 8th organization and 9th team to go back-to-back. You have Patrick Mahomes in his 4th year. Patrick Mahomes, it's his 3rd year as a starter, looking to, like I mentioned, go back-to-back. Patrick Mahomes in his career thus far, 14,000 yards and 114 touchdowns against only 24 interceptions. So nearly a 5-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio for the Chiefs' outstanding signal caller. You have Andy Reid, who's now won more than 70% of his games in Kansas City after doing an excellent job for all those years with the Philadelphia Eagles. That game will be taking place at 6:30 on CBS at Raymond James Stadium, and the Chiefs are a 3.5-point favorite. Also, what about the commercials? You have a 30-second spot this year, folks, is, get this, only a cool $5 million. That's right, a 30-second ad for this year's Super Bowl is $5 million. Without any further ado, though, let's dive into our interview with Mr. Brad Long, better known to some as Buddy from Hoosiers, and let's go to that conversation right now. One of the top sports movies and really movies of all time, and certainly one of my favorites, is Hoosiers. And right now, very excited and honored to be joined by Buddy, if you will, from Hoosiers, Mr. Brad Long. Brad, welcome into the show.
Thank you, Bubba. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Appreciate your time this morning. Like I said, I'm growing up playing basketball and just watching that movie that came out in 1986, watching it during my elementary years in the early 90s. Meant an awful lot to me. I'd love to know how many times I watched it. I had the opportunity to come up to Indianapolis in 2015 and visit the Knightstown Gym, or Hoosier Gym as they call it, in Knightstown, and that was an awesome experience. Also got to go to Hinkle Fieldhouse, formerly known as Butler Fieldhouse, and just a dream come true and bucket list type items. But before we really dive into the movie, just tell our listeners and viewers, who is Brad Long? I know you're an Indiana native, and tell us about your background in athletics.
Yes, sir. Well, I grew up, as you said, in Indiana. I'm a Hoosier boy. Grew up in the Greenwood area, which is a suburb just south of Indianapolis. Went to a high school called Center Grove High School. Graduated there in '81, and then went down to a small school in Kansas, Southwestern College, to play college basketball, and made my way back home then after that, and signed up with a company called Jostens. I sell class rings and announcements and caps and gowns, diplomas, all that good stuff. And so kind of keeps me young because I'm in the high schools all the time around high school kids. So just through osmosis kind of keeps me young. But that's kind of my background. I'm one of 3 boys. We all were basketball players. My father, Gary, played at Indiana University for Branch McCracken. He was a captain in '61. He was the same class as Walt Bellamy. And so we still have a lot of a lot of basketball in our heritage and our background, and we follow the Hoosiers pretty closely because of my dad's ties there to IU. So, and my mom Nancy was a big supporter. Just went to all of our ball games, and I'm married now, wife named Lisa, and 2 kids, Shelby and Landry, and we're off and running now. And now I've got 2 grandkids, so it's all coming full circle.
So delving into this a little bit more as far as what it means being from the Hoosier state, the game of basketball. Just tell us about that, from your perspective, and also what you think it is from a broader perspective, what the game of basketball means to a child growing up in the state of Indiana.
Right. Well, they say in Indiana that you pretty much, when you're in the crib, you're handed a little basketball to start getting the feel and the touch of it. There's not too far from the truth on that. It is definitely, I think, the sport of the state of Indiana. There's just a lot of heritage and background and history, rich history here. Even with the high school basketball tournament, which for years and years was a no class tournament. You could end up having the smallest school in the state play the biggest school in the state, and that was so intriguing to even other surrounding states. They never could quite grasp that we did that. I know when I played college down in Kansas, a lot of my teammates would ask me about that tournament, saying, how do you guys do that again? How does that work? And Indiana, in my mind, unfortunately went to class basketball in 97. That was the year that they made the jump. And I personally, my head understands why they did it, but my heart misses the old tournament. And that really was the inspiration for the movie Hoosiers, because back in 1954, in the state of Indiana, a very small school, Milan, beat Muncie Central, a very big school, for the state championship. And all these years later, they still talk about that upset, kind of a David versus Goliath theme. And that's really where the movie Hoosiers comes from that inspiration.
Absolutely, a nice segue for me and talking about that inspiration for the film Hoosiers. That was directed by a couple of Indiana graduates, if I recall correctly, and just it was such a tremendous film. And you talk about Milan, what a school of 100 and some odd people beating Muncie Central, which had more than 2,000 with their enrollment. So just the epitome of a David versus Goliath.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, it hasn't really happened since, Bubba, to be honest with you. There's been some close calls up through that 97 tournament. There was, a couple instances where you had a really small school get to the Final Four. And what you find when that happens is, of course, the other three schools root for their team, but the rest of the state roots for that small school. Kind of the old theme that underdog makes good. And I've said for years, the reason why Hoosiers does so well, and we're humbled that it did as well as it did, but you sprinkle in that recipe of somebody overachieving and beating the odds and having success. That's always going to work, because it tends to make people feel good about themselves, that, hey, I can overcome this issue or this problem or this hurdle. And people gravitate towards that. And then you sprinkle on top of it that it was based on a true story, an actual event. That, to me, that was the magic of Hoosiers. That had both pieces of that.
One of the really interesting dynamics, the way this movie unfolded, I think it was very smart for them to take this approach, going after basketball players versus just actors and trying to teach them to play basketball. So talk about the way that entire roster, both the Hickory team and then also the opposing teams, were consisting of guys who had at least played high school basketball, if not high school and college basketball, like yourself. And
Yeah, that's true. I've said for years that most sports movies, they look for actors and hope they can play basketball. This movie, they looked for basketball players and hope they could act. So it was a completely different twist. It was more authentic from the basketball standpoint. And then they didn't give us too many lines, so so we wouldn't they wouldn't see that we really didn't necessarily have the acting skills that you might get with a seasoned actor. But I will say that, I was very proud of the fact that 7 of the 8 Hickory Huskers were really nobodies like me, just Indiana boys, and that they took a chance on with the acting part. The only real actor with any street cred, if you will, was David Nydorf, who played Everett, was Dennis Hopper's son. And he had been in Platoon and Bull Durham and some other Empire of the Sun. And, but he was just like us. People tend to think actors are so different than us, and really they're just very good at their skills, but at their core, they're just people. And we learned a lot from David, and I think he learned some things from us as well.
And as far as the numbers, I've heard anywhere from like 500 to as many as 8,000. So if you would shed some light on that, and then also just talk about the process, because with there being very limited speaking parts, like you just referenced, the the process consisted more of what would be a basketball tryout or practice as opposed to what it would typically be when you're putting together a movie.
Yeah, that's true. They they did tell us that they interviewed over 8,000 young men. They went to Los Angeles, they went to Chicago, of course, they went to Indianapolis, and ultimately they ended up picking 7 of the 8 from Indiana, which again I feel was a pretty cool thing. You know, they stayed within the state and picked real Hoosier boys, if you will, and most of us had all played at least high school basketball. A couple of us played college, and not that any of us were great. I mean, from 1 to 8, we were all, decent players. We'd all either, played high school, college, or even just there was guys. I include Jimmy in this group. Morris Valanis, who played Jimmy Chitwood, got cut from his high school team. And if you saw him play, you'd say you're crazy. That's a good ball player, and he is, and he still is. He still plays, and just one of those guys. Kind of maybe got a chip on his shoulder from getting cut and just got mad about it and went out and played a lot of pickup ball. And Morris is a heck of a basketball player. So just stories like that, and had the looked like Rick Mount, elbow in, textbook shot. So he fit that character perfectly. But you're right. I mean, it was a large pool to pick from, and they kind of looked at your basketball skills first, and then kind of taught you the acting part as needed.
Since you brought up Morris' character, Jimmy Chitwood, of course, the "I'll make it" quote, and that you see on T-shirts and so on and so forth now. Um,
Right.
but talk about Jimmy Chitwood's character being inspired by Bobby Plump, who was part of that Milan team in 1954, and Bobby Plump's last-second shot.
Yeah, it pretty much is. I mean, the two guys that did the movie, you mentioned earlier, we had two gentlemen that kind of came up with the idea of Hoosiers, and it was David Anspaugh and Angelo Pizzo. That was the director and the writer, respectively. And those guys went to Indiana University, studied film, and then went on out to USC in California and continued their film studies. And had always had a dream to come back and do a movie about Indiana high school basketball. So that's really the brainchild of Hoosiers. It came from those guys, and I give them all the credit. But they kind of just scouted and looked for players. And Jimmy's one of those guys that, like I said, just, fit that character, who they were looking for. And was a kind of soft spoken and just fit the character of Jimmy perfectly, I think. And we kind of ride his coattails. We still do speaking engagements and things like that. And he's still really a humble guy. And I always tell him, I say, you're the one they want to see, not us. And he just shrugs that off. He's such a good kid. And he's not a kid anymore. We're all older men now. But yeah, just a good group of guys. We bonded immediately, and we'll always share that, common experience of Hoosiers. And it's like old college roommates, Bubba. You haven't seen them for a while. And when you do, you pick up right where you left off. And that's kind of our relationship.
When you talk about that bond and the chemistry you guys were able to develop off the set, leading into the filming, I've heard you say that you guys were in a hotel for about 2 weeks prior to everything starting.
Yeah, that is correct. I think that was by design. They wanted us to kind of build some chemistry, get to know each other, and boy, we did. You throw a bunch of young boys, age anywhere from 18 to 23. I was the oldest one actually, in a hotel. There's bound to be some hijinks, and there was a couple incidents with BB guns, and I mean, I look back on that. Those were really fun times, but all of those experiences, I think, helped carry over into the film and kind of showed the chemistry. I feel like, and I could be wrong because I'm a little biased, but I feel like if you're an observer watching Hoosiers, I feel like anyway that it looks like that we were all teammates and had known each other and been teammates for a long time. I feel like that's the way it came off, and we learned that through being together and living with each other during that time. And that 2 week period was a good kind of getting to know you thing. And then of course we stayed the whole two and a half months there in the hotel and lived together. So you get to know someone pretty quickly through that experience.
You had legendary Gene Hackman playing high school coach Norman Dale, who was getting that second opportunity and a story of redemption, having been a very successful small college coach prior to that, and then being dismissed because of mistreatment of a player. But just talk about getting to know Gene Hackman. Like you mentioned, you're a guy that's just out of college, and your teammates were at a similar stage in their lives, and then there you are, all of a sudden, on a set with Gene Hackman and Dennis Hopper, et cetera. So we'll start off talking about Gene Hackman, and I know you said he was very personable, very down to earth.
Yeah, he was. You talk about, intimidation factor. You could have gone into that situation thinking, oh my gosh, we know we're going to do our first movie we've ever done. On top of that, we're going to be in with Gene Hackman and Dennis Hopper and Barbara Hershey. But they couldn't have made it any easier for us. We did these little acting improvisational things with Gene. He came in with jeans on, and it was real informal in a hotel room, and just made us really feel comfortable. And I remember Gene telling me, the art of acting is not acting. It's really just being yourself with a little bit higher energy. And, we kind of all took that to heart. And Gene was a great guy. Here's a guy who could have been real prima donna, come in and said, hey, get out of my way, show me my spot and give me my lines. He didn't do that. Instead, he came in and said, I want to go to some high school basketball practices. I want to watch how they act, how they move, their language, the verbiage that they use on the sideline. And I was really taken aback by that. Here's a guy, could have been, like I said, real, kind of conceited about it, his craft and his role, but instead kind of humbled himself, said, hey, I want to learn. So I've always admired that about Gene. And the other ones, Dennis Hopper and Sheb Woolley and Barbara Hershey, they're just neat people. People tend to put them up on a pedestal to some degree because they're entertainers, but they're people just like us. They're just very good at what they do.
And taking a look at Dennis Hopper, until preparing for this interview, I did not realize that he was, in fact, in real life, a recovering alcoholic, and how much that prepared him for the role he was taking on as shooter in Hoosiers.
Yeah, that's true. He used to tell the press that this was a role that he had practiced his whole life. And, Dennis was the first to tell you that he, had a lot of bad habits growing up. And he told me one time he missed the 1970s. He just doesn't remember after he did Easy Rider in 69. He just kind of, that next decade just was on drugs and alcohol and all those kind of things. But he told me he kicked all those habits later in life and ended up counseling, young kids about the evils of it. And so, talk about second chances. He gave himself a second chance. And really that theme runs all the way through the movie. All through the movie, you see players getting second chances. You see the coach getting a second chance. And the movie is certainly about basketball, but it's also about redemption. And that's a good life lesson as well. But yeah, that's true about Dennis. And another little kind of trivia story I think is pretty cool is the scene where he walks out onto the court, stumbling around. He'd been drinking. He went out in the hallway and did Dizzy Lizzy with a baseball bat to get himself a little dizzy. So walking in, it looked more realistic. So you talk about method acting, but we got a kick out of that, watching him do that.
Yeah, when Dennis was, or his character Shooter was drying out, and that scene in the hospital was one of my favorites. And then also when he had returned to the bench, and when he was on the bench there, and you saw he and his son make eye contact, it was awesome. Even though, I mean, yes, it's a movie, but these things happen in real life. As far as just that bonding between father and son, and him being proud of his dad.
Yeah, and you mentioned that. That's probably, if you ask me what my favorite scene was in the movie, it'd be tempting and narcissistic, I suppose, to pick one that I'm in, but it's not. It's actually the hospital scene with Everett and his dad when he's drying out in the hospital, and that hug, and his dad saying, "I'll be there with you in spirit at the game," and that was a real emotional scene, and I love that scene, and that there's all kinds of relational bonds through the movie, whether it's Dennis and his son, whether it's Gene and Barbara, or the principal and Gene, and even when I get kicked out of the team, I early on for mouthing off, I come back and redeem myself and end up being the captain. So again, another redemption story. So there's just a lot of life lessons in the movie, and I don't know if that was by design or just worked out that way. I've always felt like, with a sports background, that there's a lot of things in sports you learn that help you later in life. You learn rejection, you learn teamwork, you learn humiliation, you learn that you can't do it all by yourself. Life isn't fair. I mean, those are all lessons I learned in sports that I think are life lessons as well. And I think a lot of those are in the movie, and you see them front and center.
Yeah, since you brought up there at the beginning of the movie, you had Coach Hackman coming in there at quote Hoosier Gym, taking over, and you had your father running the practice in the film. Chelsea Ross's character. You know, just tell us about that. And I know you said it was a very atypical role for you because that did not match your personality, but they think maybe with your maturity that you were better suited for that role.
Yeah, I get teased about that a lot. My college teammates used to say, "Man, Long, we don't ever remember you talking back to the coach like that." And I said, "Well, I know it was fun to get to play out of my skin a little bit and do something a little different." And so that is not was not typical of my attitude. I would never talk back to a coach and all that. So it was kind of fun to get to play a rebel, if you will. And yeah, that he kicked. I'm upset in that first practice because he just kicked my dad out. That never really comes out in the script, but George is my dad in the movie. He's the interim coach, and I'm supposed to be upset that that Coach Dale kicked my dad out. So I kind of act up and mouth off, and then I end up coming back. There's actually a scene that got deleted. It's in the deleted scenes where I walk into a barn and I get that's kind of my redemption time where I told Coach I made a mistake. I've been playing for Hickory my whole life. I'd like a second chance, and he gives me that chance. So that is, a lot of people don't know that Chelsea Ross, George, is my dad in the film. But then he kind of makes a turnaround from the early town meeting with Coach Dale and ends up supporting the coach as well. So there's just a lot of kind of retribution themes all throughout the movie, and I happen to be one of them.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And just talk about you're talking about Chelsea Ross. He's someone that I'm very familiar with, from Major League and then some other sports movies.
Right. Yeah, Chelsea's great. He's one of those guys that I think when you see him, you say, I know him. I remember him. He's memorable because he's in so many films, and it may not be a really big role in that film, but he's such a good actor. He makes an impression. He was in Untouchables. He was in Major League, like you say. He was in Bull Durham. I mean, you can just go down the list of movies that Chelsea has been in. It's an amazing list, really. And you talk about a humble guy. Whenever you talk to him, he never wants to talk about that. He wants to talk about you and how you're doing and how your family. And just a neat guy. And it was an honor to get to be involved with him. And Chelsea's a good man.
You referenced the deleted scenes, Brad, and just much has been made over those. And then I know on the DVD that was released here in the last several years, those deleted scenes surfaced and shed some light on some moments that were kind of unclear to the viewer, and if they weren't reading between the lines. So talk about those deleted scenes and some of the ones that really stood out in your mind.
Yeah, well, the one I mentioned before was the one where I had just been kicked out of practice for mouthing off. And then all of a sudden, a couple games later, I'm back on the team. And that gap is never really filled in. And it's a scene that got cut, and it's in the deleted scenes. And I walk into a barn and have a conversation with Coach Dale about, letting him know I made a mistake. I'd like a second chance. And he says, it's okay with me. It's Cletus, the principal. It's okay with him. And he lets me back on. And I get to drive up in 52 Chevy, which was pretty cool. Get out of that car. I walk in with my letter jacket and make that little speech in front of my then girlfriend, which never comes out in the script either. But Loetta, the head cheerleader, was my girlfriend. And there was some scenes where I walk her to class. I kiss her before I get on just a little peck before I get on the bus to go to the state finals. And it was the only really other love interest in the movie besides Gene and Barbara. But that all got cut out just because of time. They have to cut things that don't really advance the story. Another big scene that I really wished would have been left in was the harvest scene. We had to be on set at 3:30 in the morning for a dawn shot where the sun was just rising. And back then in the day, everybody helped each other with the harvest and planting and all that. Farmers got together, and we had a big scene out in a big cornfield, and then a big country dinner scene where all the families got together and had a big meal. And that was really pretty cool. The scenery on that was wonderful. And I think that ends up on the deleted scenes as well. But those are things that, you just don't know what to keep and what to, take out. And because of time and commercials, you have to keep a movie around 2 hours because you have to have it's like 12 minutes of commercial time when they show it on network TV. So if they ever released an uncut version, they could probably have a 5-hour movie on their hands.
Yeah, you talk about that time element. I had seen, maybe it was a previous interview you had done, talking about, hours upon hours, whether it's 5 or maybe even like 7, 8 hours or more of footage that they're condensing down to, in this case, I think an hour and 56 minutes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They ended up with enough footage where they probably could have done 5 movies, but that's what editors do. What they basically do in movies is they overfilm everything and then they cut and just keep the parts that they want. And you know, it is what it is. But I can tell you, you probably could release an uncut version of Hoosiers, at least in the state of Indiana, and people would probably go watch it. To see all the things that got cut out. But that's just the way they do it. And, there's very few movies that are really, long epics. There are a few of them out there and they're treated differently, but this was not in that category. And so they had to keep it around that 2-hour mark. But it's amazing to me, the stuff that they left out that we all thought was pretty cool. But you gotta prioritize. You gotta say what goes, what stays, and ultimately what advances the story. And with my kickout scene, or my scene where I come back in the barn to have that conversation, that was the last scene that was cut. And the director to this day is still upset about that because he felt like that really would have answered a lot of questions. Buddy was the most vocal one that gets kicked out of that practice, and it's never really explained how he gets back on the team. So the critics kind of ripped that a little bit, say, how does Buddy get back on the team? And the director, at that time was upset, tried to tell Orion Pictures, it's what I tried to tell you. We should have left that one in. So, at the end of the day, they put it in deleted scenes. So diehard Hoosiers will get that DVD with the deleted scenes and get to see it.
Talk about the filming process. How long, how many days, months was this going on? And then talk about what it was like, off the set during that downtime when you're filming, and some of the interaction that you and the other actors had.
Right. Yeah. I always say that, Ben-Hur, the movie Ben-Hur, probably took a lot longer than 3 months to film, but Hoosiers did not, because they use actual gyms, actual towns, not a lot of man-made sets. They filmed on location. We started filming in the middle of October. We were done in the middle of December. So what is it? That's 2 months. I mean, I think back on that, it's amazing what we did in that short period of time. But it's like putting pieces of a puzzle together. You film all different areas, and then you put it together. For instance, our home gym was in Knightstown, which you visited. Our home school was in Nineveh, which is, southern Indiana. Our hometown was New Richmond, which is kind of northwest Indiana. And then, of course, we filmed a lot of exterior shots in Danville, Indiana. So when you see the movie, it looks like, when Coach drives into the school and through the town, it's all in one area, but it's really not. It's all different areas, and they make it look like it's one big town or community.
Brad, tell us about the attention to detail within this film. That's one of the things that really stood out to me. Whether it was the uniforms, obviously, but then things like the court markings. Had to keep it with the time. If you notice the court there at the old Hoosier gym, you didn't have your typical mid court line that you would think of, but there's all kinds of elements. The locker rooms, and so much attention to detail.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They were real careful about making it look like you were in 1952. You mentioned the court. That's where the term "the key" comes from. In the key back then, the lane was narrow, so the circle that the arc around the free throw line was a big circle, and then there was these lines that were real closer to each other than they are now. So it made it look like, from an aerial shot, a key. And of course, that's all changed now. The lane has been widened, and a lot of people don't know this, but this is a trivia question. One man changed that, and it was Wilt Chamberlain. He was able to rebound the ball from the other side of the lane because he was so big, and so they had to widen that. So they did. And then just detail things. Like, one thing I remember is we were filming footage of the crowd clapping and screaming, and they had filmed for about 2-3 hours one day, and the writer came down and said, we've got to cut all that and start over again. And the reason why was they would get thirsty, and so they'd pass soft drinks out to them, Coke, 7-Up, Pepsi, and they would take a drink and set their can down beside them, and that made it in the shot. And in 1952, they had not invented aluminum cans yet. They still were using old glass Coke bottles at that time. So they had to fly out old prop Coke bottles and reshoot that. Even things like sweat. Of course, a lot of times we were hot and sweaty because we were running around, but in between takes when things would slow down, they would spray us with a mixture of water and glycerin, and that made it kind of a sticky, it looked like sweat. So just little things like that, little details, I felt like they did a really good job trying to capture that time period. Like you mentioned, the uniforms, the old satin shorts with the belts, the hand stitched uniforms, that was all pretty much the way they made them during that time period. So it was pretty realistic from that standpoint.
Before we talk about the modern day, the influence, the impact this film has had over the last 3.5 decades, just one more direct question about the filming of the movie. And that championship game at Butler Fieldhouse, or now Hinkle Fieldhouse, I had the opportunity to visit there, and just I've heard you say that was probably the most organic aspect of the film, as far as being able to freelance a bit in terms of the basketball, but then also the crowd rushing the court.
Yeah, that everything there was just magical. Everything about it. Getting to film in Butler Fieldhouse, which is of course being renamed Hinkle Fieldhouse, is a magical place. That night when Jimmy hits the final shot, he had been missing in warm-ups, and I remember Gene Hackman coming up to the director and said, "Do we need to move him in a little bit?" And he overheard it and said, "Don't worry about it. When it counts, I'll make it." Very much like the line he has in the movie, where I'll make it. And we did 3 takes on that, and he made all 3 of them. And I think they took the first one because it was so genuine. The crowd was genuinely thrilled because he made it. He had been missing. So, I was teasing him all these years later, say, "You set that up, didn't you? You were missing on purpose so that when you made it for real, everybody would be authentically excited." And so I tell him, if that's not the case, that's a story he needs to use. But so yeah, that was, to get to use that field house, which has so much history, the crowd rushing the floor. Like I said, I think that was the first take, was the one that they took out of that. And you're right, a lot of that footage, we're just playing basketball. They rolled the ball out and said, "You guys play. We'll keep some of the footage." And there were a few set plays, obviously the final shot, and a few things that we did in there that were set up, but a lot of it is just good old fashioned scrimmaging. And we're going at it. They're trying to beat us, and we're trying to beat them.
Nearly 3.5 decades ago, you could not have imagined that, here 35 years or so later, that you would be talking about this movie the way you are, doing interviews, motivational speaking, so on and so forth. So just talk about the wide reaching and long lasting impact of Hoosiers. And, you see the Indiana Pacers wearing Hickory Husker uniforms. I've always loved those. You have Bobby Plump's last shot restaurant, and that's obviously and that's tied directly to the real life event. But then you have the NCAA tournament this year being played in the state of Indiana at 5 or 6 different sites, including Ball State, IUPUI, Butler, there at Hinkle Fieldhouse, and so on. So I know that a reunion is in the works, and you have commercials and other things as well.
Yeah, it's amazing, really, the effect and the influence it's had. I mean, you asked the question, would I have guessed that all this would happen? The answer is no. I mean, when we were filming at the time, I had just finished college, and we used to have press days where the press would come out and watch us and ask questions. And that's what it reminded me of when we were filming that. We had no idea at the time what it would turn into. I don't think the writer and director did. But then all these years later, it's just kind of become a cult classic. ESPN keeps helping us by ranking it highly. It's just humbling when you see the success that it has had, and they keep, like I said, it's keeps getting momentum every year. During Final Four, they mention it, and yeah, the Final Four is going to be here again. And the last time it was here, they included us in some interviews. And I've heard Jim Nance is a good friend of Bobby Plump's, and there's might even be some involvement possibly this spring with us again. And Bobby is just one of the nicest guys you'll ever want to meet. It's the old axiom that nice guys finish last is absolutely not the case with him. He's a nice guy, and he's just, that shot has just been such a big part of his life. I know he told the story once that after that shot, in the years that followed, people would send him letters, and they would just they didn't know what town he lived in, and they would address it to his name and just say Plump, Indiana, and it would get delivered to him. Now think about that. I don't know that you can even do that nowadays legally, but the mail folks knew about it, knew about him, and they would be delivered to him. But yeah, he's got the restaurant. They've got the Hoosier gym there that you visited. The Milan guys are still revered. They're in their 80s now. We've lost a couple of them here over the last couple of years, but the ones that are still with us are just the nicest guys in the world. We ride their coattails when we go do events, and then the Final Four usually resurrects the Hoosiers theme again. It's just amazing how it lives on after all these years. And to answer your first question, I don't think any of us would have dreamed that it would have this influence all these years later.
It has been awesome having you on the program. Really appreciate your time this morning. And as we're wrapping this up, my son was 3.5 when we visited Knightstown and the Hoosier gym back in the spring of 2015. I look forward to hopefully getting back there again someday. I know they'll do everything they can to preserve it, and it's awesome how you have high school teams coming in and playing a game there and then hanging their jersey, and then other teams, even though they may not play a game there, they make trips there, as well as a ton of other basketball celebrities. So it's awesome to see, and I know I just really appreciate you coming on the program to discuss it.
Well, Bub, I appreciate you having me. It's been a pleasure. I would tell you, if you and your son come back again, give me a holler. We'll meet up. It's about an hour and a half from where I live, and I make my way over there every now and then for little engagements and meet and greets. And it's just one of those things. They found their niche over there. They've just done a great job with it, and it's amazing all these years later that I've been told that they have hundreds of thousands of visitors a year from 70 countries, to come there, and that's just amazing to me. But and I'll run into people that'll quote lines from the movie, and of course my dentine line. I get a lot. People ask me if I chew dentine, and Gene Hackman told me that was his single favorite line in the whole movie. So that means a lot to me, and so it's just one of those things. I'm humbled by it. We're grateful to have had the opportunity. And if you're back up this way, you and your boy, you give me a call.
Most definitely, we'll take you up on that offer. And folks, there you have it. That is Mr. Brad Long, Buddy from Hoosiers. That concludes this edition of the Bubba Rose Show. We appreciate you tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you listen. Also, be sure to follow us on social media at Bubba Rosenbaum on Twitter, at Bubba Rose Show on Instagram. Like and follow the Bubba Rose Show Facebook page, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let us hear from you by emailing us at thebubbaroseshow@gmail.com. Again, that's thebubbaroseshow@gmail.com. We'll talk to you next time, y'all.